Hey everybody, ManEvolving Blake Tumbleson here. I recently had the extreme pleasure and honor of interviewing Rich Roll. Rich is a graduate of Stanford University and Cornell Law School. He's a world-renowned vegan ultra-endurance athlete and author of Finding Ultra, Rejecting Middle Age, Becoming One of the World's Fittest Men, and Discovering Myself. Now, how can Rich call himself one of the world's fittest men? Well, he didn't. Men's Fitness magazine named him one of the world's 25 fittest men. And Rich is not only a passionate ultra-endurance athlete, but definitely a man evolving. But he's not always been one of the world's fittest men, or fit at all. In fact, he spent years as a workaholic, alcoholic, overweight, and out of shape. But in 2006, at the age of 40, Rich decided that he was done living a compromised life. He was about to get off the couch and get in shape. This was the same year he celebrated his 10th anniversary in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. Rich became a dedicated vegan, and just 2 years later, and 50 pounds lighter, he became the first vegan to participate in the Ultraman World Championship in Hawaii. Not only did he participate, but he clocked top finishes. Now, the Ultraman World Championship is a double Ironman distance triathlon, widely considered one of the most grueling endurance events on the planet. But Rich wanted to find the limits of the human body. So in 2010, Rich and his colleague, Jason Lester, accomplished something they titled the Epic 5 Challenge. This consisted of completing 5 Ironman distance marathons on 5 Hawaiian islands in under a week. Well, did they do it? What did they go through? Well, you're going to have to buy Rich's book to find that out, but trust me, you will not regret the investment of your time. Rich is a true inspiration. You're also going to want to go to his website, richroll.com, and his book site, findingultra.com. Oh, and by the way, his podcasts top the charts on iTunes. Now get ready to meet Rich Roll in an interview that is unlike any other he has given. What might surprise you is that we don't talk running, swimming, biking, or Ultraman competitions. Instead, Rich talks about being a dad, getting sober, changing careers, the power of vulnerability, finding himself, and of course, being a man evolving. So here it is, part 1 of my interview with Rich Roll. I know that you're going to enjoy your time with Rich. Thanks. Do you have any kids?
I do have 4 kids.
4 kids.
Yeah.
How many boys, how many girls?
2 boys, 2 teenage boys. They're 16. Well, Trapper's almost about, he turns 17 next month. Tyler's 18, and then I have 2 girls that are 9 and 5. 9 and 6 now. I can't keep track anymore. Yeah.
Awesome. Just give me a little bit about your background before we get into what you're doing now.
Well, I grew up in a pretty traditional household. You know, 2 parents that are still married, and a sister who's 2 years younger than me. And it was a pretty traditional upbringing. You know, education was very important. So there was a lot of emphasis on performing at school. And I was not historically a great student originally. My parents got me, you know, they were concerned about it. They got me into a private school, and my grades started to pick up. By the time I graduated from high school, I had the privilege of going to like a really nice prep school in Washington, D.C., where education is like king. And I graduated near the top of my class, and I was a competitive swimmer. That was my thing growing up. I was kind of an awkward, shy kid. I wasn't very sociable. I was not the kid who was getting invited to any parties, and didn't really feel comfortable in my own skin. And the only thing I was really good at was swimming, so I kind of gravitated towards that. And by the time I was in high school, I was training 4 hours a day, getting up at 4:45 every morning, hour and 45 minutes or hour and a half of swim practice in the morning before school, and 2 hours after school every day. So that was kind of my life, just swimming and school until I went to college.
Yeah, and then what did you go to school for?
And I went to Stanford. Originally I was going to be pre-med, and I went to Stanford because it's a great swimming school. I was recruited to be a swimmer, and great academics, obviously. Originally I thought I would be a doctor. I started out pre-med, And then I got more interested in partying and girls and beer, and lost interest in the more erudite pursuits. So yeah, no, I ended up studying, I was an American Studies major, which is sort of a hybrid of history and political science and English, essentially. I enjoyed it, but I had a good time in college, let's put it that way. My swimming career did not flourish, but my social horizons expanded.
Very good, okay. So then you practiced law for a period of time?
I did. I went, after Stanford, I lived in New York City for a couple years, which was a great training ground for the alcoholic that I would soon become. Like any good alcoholic, moving to New York City is a great place to do it. You don't have to drive a car, and you can walk around on the street with beer. It's excellent. Yeah. So I did that, and then I went to law school at Cornell in upstate New York, where I perfected my alcoholic techniques. And somehow managed to graduate. It's funny because after the talk tonight, there were two Cornell Law School professors that were there, and they came up to me and they're like, "We want to have you come and talk to the law students." And I said, "I'm a graduate of some ill repute, you know, like I'm amazed that I even graduated there." Yeah. So the idea that I would be asked to go and speak there is kind of mind-boggling to me. But somehow I was able to kind of graduate and ended up a corporate lawyer initially at a big law firm in San Francisco, and then moved down to Los Angeles, a big entertainment litigation firm where I was a lawyer for a number of years and worked on some pretty high-profile stuff. I was second chair on a couple cases with Robert Shapiro, who's like the OJ lawyer. Like I was working with some pretty heavy-hitting people, and you know, like all good kind of corporate lawyers, sort of getting used to that 80-hour, you know, work week existence. And I did that for several years.
Yeah. And when you say alcoholic, you're not talking about a college drinker. You're talking about an actual alcoholic.
Yeah, oh yeah, very much so, an actual alcoholic, and it's a big part of my story. Not that my sort of exploits as an alcoholic are all that extraordinary. They're actually pretty pedestrian and garden variety in the kind of pantheon of alcoholic stories. But you know, I definitely am an alcoholic, and it took me to some very dark places. And ultimately, you know, when I was a lawyer in Los Angeles, it's a progressive disease. It just gets worse and worse and worse. And even though I was aware that I was an alcoholic and made fits and starts at trying to get sober on my own terms, it would always inevitably end up in a relapse. And you know, I think I counted, I'd been pulled over for a DUI like 12 times or something like that over the years, and had always managed to talk my way out of it or squeak by. And you know, when I was a lawyer in San Francisco, I'd drive drunk on back streets and always figure out a way to, you know, manage it. But when you move to LA, it's a completely different thing. You know, like it was not very long after I moved to Los Angeles that I got pulled over. And the LA cops don't mess around. I mean, when they pull you over, the assumption is, you're a gangster, you're high on crack, you have a shotgun, and you know, a trunk with a dead body in it. I mean, that's sort of the, you know, and they treat you accordingly. And so it was not very long after I lived there that I got pulled over. I ended up getting 2 DUIs within a period of 6 weeks or something like that. And that's where I kind of started to meet my maker and realize like I had something that I had to deal with, which began the process. You know, it wasn't an immediate thing. It took me a couple more years and going that elevator, continuing to go down and down and down before ultimately I got sober. But
let's talk about that a little bit, because ManEvolving is all about changing your life, going from either where you are to where you want to be, or where you were to, you know, where you are, and ultimately, you know, your goal. So, was there a particular life event that changed things for you? And I know there's just so much that we can talk about.
Yeah.
But is there a life event that changed things?
Well, I think
what happened internally?
I think well, just to sort of speak to what you're getting at. My whole life had been oriented around doing kind of what I was supposed to do as somebody, as a man of good education. You know what I mean? Like, I had the privilege of being able to attend Stanford University, and that's great, but it also carries a mantle of responsibility. It's sort of like, I can't go like, oh, I want to be an actor now. You know, I guess I could do that, but it's sort of in my mind, it's like, well, with this, I need to go and use this degree and leverage this amazing experience that I had. And, you know, in my mind, the choices were limited. It's like investment banker, doctor, lawyer. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's kind of what I was expected to do. A lot of that is my own pressure that I put on myself. You know, it wasn't necessarily anybody else's fault. It was sort of what I internalized about what society expected of me, or what a responsible man looks like who has this pedigree, right? So I pursued law school, and not because I had some love of the law, but I thought, well, this is something that, you know, is an intellectual thing, and I can get paid well to do this, and I get to wear a nice suit and some cool glasses and go out to nice lunches and have intellectual conversations, and society will approve of that. Yeah. You know, and I pursued that, and I was on the partnership track, and at this big law firm I was being groomed to be a partner. And it wasn't like I had one moment of clarity. I think, you know, getting sober was the initial sort of process of arresting that that kind of escalator, you know what I mean, where I was just sort of on the habit trail. Like it wasn't like I ever took the time to stop, to pause, and look inward and say, well, what do I want? What makes me happy? What makes me tick? What do I have to offer? What will be personally fulfilling for me? It was just, this is what I'm supposed to do, and this is how I can make a good living, and this is, I want the world to perceive me as responsible. And getting sober was the first time I hit the pause button in my life and took a moment to contemplate like the decisions that I had made and the ramifications of those decisions. And so it wasn't like an overnight thing where I said, okay, I'm done with this life and I'm doing something new, but it was the beginning of going, it's important that I develop a relationship with myself. And I'd used drugs and alcohol for so long that I didn't know who I was. I didn't have a relationship with myself. I was completely disconnected. If you were to say to me, what's your dream or what's your goal? I'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know, you know? And I think a lot of people kind of exist in that paradigm, and it doesn't have to be that way, and it's unfortunate. And I had the fortunate opportunity. It's sort of like, you hear in recovery, like, I'm a grateful alcoholic. And initially I'm like, what does that mean? Like, how could you be grateful for that? And I can honestly say that I understand that, and I feel the same way, because the experience of sobriety has allowed me to develop a connection with myself, which gives me a better intuition of what's right for me as a man, you know what I mean? And sort of to speak to kind of the ethos or the themes of your site, which I think are great, and we talked off camera earlier at lunch, you know, there are a lot of men who feel trapped by society's expectations or don't have mentors or peers or anyone to look to for guidance. And we're not taught that it's okay to share our feelings or to connect with one another, to be vulnerable. Yeah. You know, and we're taught that being vulnerable or showing emotions is a sign of weakness, and that is not what a man is supposed to do. And I've actually come to understand the opposite, which is that vulnerability, to be able to be vulnerable, is the greatest strength that you can have, because to be vulnerable in the presence of another shows that you have a sense of self, a strong sense of self, that you're not threatened by that. And I've experienced through the writing of my book and talks like I gave tonight and all over the country, that when I have the courage to be vulnerable in a public venue or in a one-on-one situation like this, that's where magic can happen, because you're being authentic to who you are.
And how, when you, and I absolutely agree with everything you just said, because that is, I mean, that was my personal struggle as well. I was living a certain life and I wanted to be somewhere else. And when you become vulnerable, you allow yourself to become vulnerable, and you start living this new life, how does that change the people around you, or how does that change the people that are following Rich Roll? And you know, how are you impacting the world perhaps just by that one thing?
Right.
By saying, I'm willing to be vulnerable, I'm willing to show you my guts.
It's scary, and it's still scary, and I think that I'd be lying if I said, oh, it's just, you take a leap of faith and just embrace the unknown, and then it's just, it's just rainbows and unicorns after that. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not easy. Like, I've made a choice to leave the safety of big law firm life and live in the mystery of not knowing what's going to happen. And there's been times where it's been really, really difficult. I feel more fulfilled and better about who I am than I ever thought possible, but that doesn't mean that there haven't been times that I've second-guessed what I'm doing, or I thought, was this really responsible? Because it is a warrior's path, you know what I mean? It's very difficult and challenging, but if you have the wherewithal to see it through, to kind of listen to yourself and follow those breadcrumbs, regardless of what other people say or whatever their opinions are about you, you will find your own truth and you will find satisfaction in that. And I think initially, you know, people are threatened by somebody who says, I'm going to break the paradigm or I'm going to step outside this system, because if you can do that, then that means that they can too, and some people aren't ready or don't really want to look at that.
It puts pressure on them.
It can be frightening, and so it's easier to say that guy's crazy or, you know, talk shit about him or something like that. And I've experienced that too. Ultimately, if you remain true to that though, and kind of see it through, then, you know, you're essentially what you're doing is you're kind of standing in the light, you know, in your own personal truth, and there's a power to that, and ultimately that power will develop a center of gravity, and the people that you want in your life will be attracted to that. You know, it's sort of like water rises to its own level. You can't attract the people in your life that you want until you're living, you know, an honest life that's right for you. And so there was another part of your question though. Oh, the impact of being vulnerable. So I remember, well, this is, you know, when I was writing my book. Tell me the name of your book. My book is called Finding Ultra, and it's a memoir. It's kind of my story of sort of a redemptive story from alcoholic to kind of ultra athlete and plant-based nutrition, et cetera. And when I was writing my book, I thought, who the heck wants to read this? It's not like I'm a professional athlete, and I haven't even won a race. You know, it's like, so what am I doing? You know, and why do I have this book deal? Like, what is it that I have to offer or that I have to say? And I looked at, you know, I've read a lot of sports biographies and memoirs, and most of them are horrible because they're not written honestly. They're written by a team of people whose intention is, let's extend the brand of this athlete in the twilight of their career so we can continue to get sponsorship money. That's really kind of what it's about. And it's very rare that a sports memoir comes along that is heartfelt and honest, like Andre Agassi's Open is a good example, I think. And I thought the only way that anybody's going to care about my book or that it's going to have any impact at all or be interesting to anybody is directly related to the extent that I'm willing to be vulnerable and open. And I knew that going in. And I said, people aren't going to read this because they want to read about a champion. They're going to want to read about this because they're going to see themselves in it. Yeah. There's a difference between inspirational, like Michael Jordan is inspirational, and aspirational, like somebody who's achieved something, but it's still within the grasp of the everyman. And so that was, when I was writing, I was like, the only way I could write the book is just to pretend that I was writing a private diary that no one was going to read. And I had to be willing to say things about myself that I wasn't proud of, and mistakes that I've made, and dark things that, you know, are private to me. And every once in a while I'd freak out because I'd have a flash in my mind of the book sitting on a shelf in a bookstore and thinking, oh my God, this is terrible, like who wants to read this? You know, but that was kind of my MO. And I'll never forget the moment that I turned my manuscript into my publisher, and I looked at my wife and I said, I hope I didn't make the biggest mistake in my life, because it is a very vulnerable feeling. It's like, this is my life with all its potholes and mistakes and all of that. And that's ultimately been the greatest strength of the book. You know, it's really understanding that equation between vulnerability and strength, and that the power of the book is in the vulnerability, because that's what people see in themselves, even if they don't want to admit it to another person. Yeah. That's what they're connecting to. Yeah.